So hi, Adrian. Hi again. So last time we talked about breathing and how breathing affects different parts of the brain. I think a really nice idea for today is that we move a little bit away from how specifically breathing can target different brain areas and go to a little bit more easily understandable and also usable maybe stuff, how breathing affects the body, the physiology, and also like the muscle function in your body, and what we can do to affect that, and what kind of tests we could do to figure out where your issue is. So in essence, I think if you think about breathing, not too much from a brain perspective, there are three major things that we can worry about. So one would be your breathing, your basic breathing patterns. So meaning, are you like more like a nose breather or a mouth breather? Are you like an upper chest breather or like a lower chest or abdomen breather? So these are kind of like the basic patterns or habits that you have created throughout your life. But essentially, are you nose or mouth breathing? Then I think another really interesting topic is your biomechanics. Are you using your breathing muscles appropriately? So we have talked about a couple of the muscles. The most important breathing muscle is the diaphragm, especially when we have normally relaxed breathing. But in essence, there's a bunch of different muscles, at least eight other muscles that I can think about right now that help us inhaling, and a couple of muscles that help us exhaling, that are important, especially when we do higher intensity exercises. And I'll talk about later why this is important. And then I think the final one is the biochemistry. It essentially has to do with your CO2, O2 level in the blood, and how you can how a disbalance of these can create issues, and how we can fix these issues. So I think that's kind of like the basic overview. Is we have these three different things that we can look at, and that's what we're going to do today. So first of all, I think what's super important is realizing how you breathe for yourself. And I think what I oftentimes recommend to people, and it's one of the drills that I learned from Sea Health. It's not a drill; it's like more like a test from Sea Health. Is kind of like an breathing awareness test. So I think what's really nice initially, a lot of people don't think whether they're breathing through the nose or whether they're breathing through the mouth, is when you just sit upright in a chair or lie down on the floor, that you do something where you initially consciously breathe through your nose. So take a couple of normal breaths through your nose. See how you breathe. And it's more about feeling how the air is passaging through all the structures behind the nose. And actually it's a fairly long pathway until it reaches the lungs. Do this a couple of times. And then also, when you've done it a couple of times, think about having a couple of really forcefully quick inhales through the nose, where you really go like, and try to figure out how long it takes you to fill the full lungs with air. So I want to take a really deep inhale through the nose as quickly as I can. And then we do kind of the opposite. We breathe through the mouth. And what you should feel is a different sensation of breathing. Like a lot of the stuff that the nose is doing, it's humidifying the air. It's also cleaning the air. It's warming the air that you inhale. So it has a lot of functions in regards to filtering and making the air or the oxygen and whatever that is more absorbable for the body. And now we contrast it by breathing through the mouth. So just open your mouth and inhale through your mouth. And when you realize it's a totally different sensation compared to breathing through your nose. And then do a couple of quick inhales through your mouth. So try to fill your lungs as quickly as you can. And you'll realize that the volume of air that you can inhale is probably way bigger, or it's quicker than through your nose. So that's one of the reasons why, you feel it, but that's one of the reasons why when you do super high intensity exercises, that a lot of people switch to like mouth breathing. For quite a bunch of people, they switch to mouth breathing way too early. But in essence, it's going to be like a natural reflex when you're doing very, very high intensities that you're going to switch to mouth breathing. And then you can do a couple of where you're just conscious that you go one deep inhale, quick inhale with the nose, and then one with the mouth. And then
what's the reason why people change to mouth breathing without really realizing? Because now I'm trying to always breathe through my nose, but I don't even realize that I changed to mouth breathing when I'm training. And I think it's like, as soon as I step on the gym and grab a bar, like even, mobilizing and things like that, I think I'm already breathing through my mouth.
You are already breathing through your mouth?
I think so. Like I try to do the warm up and all of that, just making sure that I breathe through my nose. But then once I start lifting weights or like just EMOM or whatever, I'm pretty sure I breathe through my mouth.
I think one of the really cool things, and I think it goes back to the guy from Buteiko that came up with that, is also during night that you just tape your mouth so that you can't breathe through your mouth. And it's super interesting to see for a lot of people is that they almost can't do it breathing through the mouth when they're sleeping.
Mouth
you can actually use that as well. You tape your mouth so that you can't breathe through your mouth.
Through your mouth.
Put a tape on your mouth. So that you only can breathe through the nose.
But
and a lot of people have a really hard time doing that.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
But it's really good because you switch. It's a really cool way of switching to nose breathing in an unconscious state. So the really cool thing about keeping your mouth, if you have a hard time breathing through your nose, is that you're forced to breathe through your nose. And this feels shitty for the first couple of or for a couple of days, but then it actually feels really nice if you're getting used to it. And the cool thing, it has a huge carryover for your normal breathing patterns when you live your daily life, because then you're breathing already 8 to 10 hours through your nose every day. And it has a really cool carryover to normal breathing. One of the reasons why a lot of people switch to mouth breathing when they do exercises, like the body is trying to regulate like CO2 level and acid balance, and one of the way to regulate that is by exhaling the CO2. And as you like figured out for yourself, is if you breathe through your mouth, there's like air volume that you can move quicker. And one of the main reasons is to keep the CO2-O2 in balance. When the CO2 levels rise, it gives a signal to the body to increase breathing rate. So like in the brain or in the body, breathing is not so much regulated by oxygen levels. It's more regulated over CO2 levels. And when the CO2 levels rise, because the oxygen levels, they are fairly constant in the body. Like even if you do really high intensity training, like almost everything, you have around 95 to 98% of saturation in the bloodstream of oxygen. So you have almost enough oxygen, whatever you do. But what happens is the CO2 levels rise quite dramatically if you start exercising. And one way to get rid of them quickly is by exhaling. And that's one of the issues, as well as if your threshold for CO2 is very low. So if you have, for example, if you have like an upper chest breathing pattern and you have a very, very high breathing frequency, you're going to exhale way too much CO2. So you're constantly exhaling a lot of CO2, and your threshold for CO2, when it's normally up here, it will go down to, let's say, here. And now you start doing exercise, and any deviation from that very low state upwards actually gives you the feeling that you're accumulating too much oxygen, that you're running out of air. And if your threshold is way higher and you start exercising, your threshold for CO2 is way higher, it's more easy for you to breathe through your nose or keep on breathing through your nose, because you don't have that feeling of, oh my God, I'm not getting enough air in.
So what's the problem of getting rid of CO2? Because that's,
what's the problem of getting rid of CO2? Yeah. So in the end, it's important to have that, let's say, fairly tightly controlled balance. and it actually makes perfect sense from a physiological standpoint. There is an effect called Bohr effect. It's I think it was the father of the physicist that won the Nobel Prize. He came up with that effect. He was a medical doctor, and or he discovered it. Let's say it that way. And what they found out is that the affinity, so the ability for the oxygen to dissociate from the hemoglobin, is way higher when the concentration of CO2 is high.
Okay.
So,
how is called the effect again?
Or BOHR.
Okay.
So what that means is, if your muscles start to work, they are producing oxygen. They are burning fuel. They are producing oxygen. CO2. They are
CO2.
CO2. So now the CO2 levels rise locally in the tissue, and that allows the oxygen to more easily go from the hemoglobin into the muscles because the CO2 concentration is higher. So it's easier. The gas exchange is easier when the CO2 concentration is high. If you have a very low CO2 concentration in the tissue, it's harder for the oxygen to dissociate from the hemoglobin and move into the cells that burn the energy. So a higher concentration of CO2 actually allows the muscles to get oxygen in better and CO2 out. And that's why it's important to have kind of like a
good balance.
A balance and not being like totally dysregulated. So the drills that we just did, it's fairly simple. It's in a self-assessment. How does it feel to breathe through your nose? How does it feel to breathe through your mouth? I think the second one that is really, really nice is if you put one hand on your belly, one hand on your chest, you can have the coach do that on you. So you're having your one hand here, or you can assess it for yourself. You inhale, and the first thing that we're looking for is, or actually we're looking for three different things, is which hand is moving first. So let me check if you can see it from the side. But I'm sitting like this. If I breathe like that, you see that the upper hand is moving first. Did you see it? I mean, it's not like huge, but can you see that? Yeah. So this is like a typical sign of upper chest breathing. I'm not using my diaphragm well. I'm using more the muscle, like my pectoral muscles and muscles that are normally supplementary or auxiliary breathing muscles to help me breathe. That's not ideal. Okay. The second thing that we're looking for is the upper hand. Even if it's not moving first, is it coming up towards the throat, or is it coming forward a little? So if I breathe like this, you see that the hand is coming up. That's what a lot of people do, and you probably figure it out when you're under stress and you take a second and consciously breathe. What you'll see is that this like you're using
you cannot do a shrug always.
You use your sternocleidomastoidea and your scalene muscles that pulls on the ribs, that pull the ribs a little up. It's kind of like this breathing pattern where you lift the rib cage up to get air in. So this is the second one. And then even if you breathe well, some people start well. So the bottom hand moves first, but then they have a lot of movement at the top hand. So what we ideally want to see, and if you have a coach, he can be looking for it, is that the lower hand moves more, and that the lower hand is initiating the inhalation as well. So when I inhale, it should look more a little bit like that. And then I have a little movement at the top. So I hope you can see this, but the lower hand moves first.
I can see that,
And then the upper hand moves. And there's not a lot of elevation of the upper
expansion.
So the goal essentially, the diaphragm is descending, and then later on, when we think about all the other muscles involved in breathing, we still want to think about expansion of the rib cage. It's super important, and all the auxiliary muscles that help in breathing are actually expanding the rib cage. If you think about your pecs and your serratus posterior muscles, your scalenes, all these muscles, they're kind of like pulling the ribs up and away from the body so that your lungs can fill more easily with air. So these are essentially are really nice ways of looking at basic breathing function. Are you breathing through your nose? Are you breathing through your mouth? Are you using abdominal breathing, or are you an upper chest breather? I think something that is really nice as well is to look at breathing from, or to look at breathing as from a three-dimensional perspective. Now we were just focusing on the front, but essentially breathing is like a three-dimensional thing that should happen. So one thing that you could do, once again, if you have a coach, you can lie down on your belly. You can place a hand at the lower back and at the upper back. And then what you should feel when somebody's inhaling, if this is the lower back now, is that there's kind of like a wave coming from the lower back, the lower side is expanding if I inhale because the diaphragm is descending. So this like the belly, it pushes the belly out, but it should also push the rear hand a little further back. It's not a big motion, but the rear hand should elevate in the bottom of the back, and then it should come up to the thoracic spine, and then we should see an expansion over there. What you oftentimes see is that there's no movement in the back whatsoever. But we also want to think about it. It's not only that the belly goes forward and back, it's actually the ribs come out, the low back is, the tissues being pushed back a little bit over there. So low back. And the other thing that's a really nice test is if you have a coach and you place your hands on the lower ribs and look at the inhalation of somebody, what you should see is that the thumbs are moving away from each other when people inhale. So when I'm here, I'm close to my spine. When I inhale, the thumbs should be moving away from each other. Did you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. What you very oftentimes see if people have issues breathing is, so if these are my thumbs now, that one hand moves and the other hand is not moving. So what essentially is happening, on one side you have pretty good excursion of the rib space. On the other hand, the ribs are almost not moving. And this, once again, it creates huge problems in the long run because you're actually mainly using one lung field compared to the other.
Is this a normal thing? Or like a lot of people?
It happens in a lot of people. It happens in a lot of people. If you had trauma, or if you're sitting constantly in a weird position where you have too much compression on one side, it can be that you only get the movement on one side. If you had an operation, if you had there's so many things that if you had like trauma, if you had rib trauma and your ribs didn't move for a while, or you were like consciously trying not to breathe into one area. Like I had a rib fracture over here, I had one over here. So I think thinking about that rhythmic excursion really helps, and it also facilitates that thinking about, hey, it's a three-dimensional process. It's not just belly out, belly in. It should be a three-dimensional expansion. And these four things are just cool tests to see what is happening in like breathing wise. Do you have a natural three-dimensional breathing, a natural three-dimensional expansion of the chest, and then the other stuff was, are you now smooth breathing? So
is this the same pattern that you use for breathing, resting, that exercising, and depending on the exercise that you do you change the breathing pattern, or it should always be the same and then adapted?
Like the main muscle responsible for breathing is the diaphragm, and I think about it like muscle function. If you have muscles, you have different motor units that are engaging like a different number of muscle fibers. And what you normally see is, let's say I'm doing an air squat or I'm just walking. There are not a lot of muscle fibers that are used in my quad. It's mainly the slow twitch fibers that are being used. They can produce energy very, very effectively, but not for a very high power outputs. And let's say I add 40 kilos to the bar, or I use a bar with 40 kilos. What suddenly will happen is that the body recruits more muscle fibers, or that the quad is recruiting more muscle fibers to move the load. And then I add like another 40 kilos to the bar. Now I'm at 80 or 120 kilos. And what's happening is there's more and more muscle fibers being added to the mix. And I think for breathing, it's kind of the same. If you have if you are breathing normally, the main muscle that should be working is the diaphragm. And then the more intense and strenuous the exercise gets, the more you're going to use your auxiliary muscle or muscles.
I find it difficult as well in the middle of a workout to concentrate on using the diaphragm. So I normally start like when I'm too tired, and then I'm kind of stopping a little bit and trying to recover the breath. Then is when I'm thinking, oh, use the diaphragm. But when I am in the middle of the workout, it's like yesterday we were doing burpees. So, when you go down and up, you need to make sure that you breathe at this. I couldn't count. I couldn't breathe through my diaphragm, and I couldn't do the breathing properly. So I needed to choose one or two, not all of them. And I think that's probably because I don't do it too often to make sure that that's I interiorize the pattern.
You know what I think? It reminds me of these old CrossFit discussion about technique and intensity. I think if you can't do, if you are learning how to do power snatches and you're doing the workout Isabel, your main goal should not be to do Isabel as fast as you can, but it should probably be trying to solidify the technique with a meaningful weight and still getting some cardiorespiratory response doing it. At least that's my take on it. So your main issue is, hey, can I do this movement really well? It's not so much about only being fast at the movement. And I think what happens in here is if you practice something that has not been very much solidified in training or through training, it's very hard to do it unconsciously when you are in a situation of stress. And I think that's basically it. It's very hard to do it if you're not. I think the best way to practice it is in the warm-up and do this stuff for like 10-15 minutes consciously in the warm-up, or even tape your mouth when you do the warm-up and try to get a lot of like low intensity training practice in there, and then let this drift over to being unconscious effort in the workouts as well. But it really takes time to change the breathing patterns. It's not so easy. But I've been working with a couple of athletes, and it has really good effect on like almost everything, like really like body wise, but also endurance wise. It has quite cool benefits. There is this reflex. It's called metaboloreflex reflex. It's actually when you're doing high intensity, metaboloreflex, that's the correct word. When you do high intensity training, and you have a lot of like maximal exercise that you're doing, is that the brain or the body is pulling blood away from the muscle tissue, from the periphery, and pulling it closer to the lungs to actually get more gas exchange in the lungs happening. And the less efficient you're with breathing, the more this reflex is going to kick in. So there's a bunch of reasons why you really want to focus on breathing. And I think I read something that around almost up to 16% of your cardiac output is in maximal exercise is there to support breathing and respiratory muscle function. So 16% is quite a lot. So for everything that your heart does, 16% of the output of the heart goes to the breathing musculature. And I think if you can't use that effectively, you'll have way higher levels of percentages. And the body's essentially, the brain is saying, hey, you know what, your breathing really sucks. We are going to pull away the blood from the periphery, pull it closer to the lungs so that you stay well oxygenated and have proper CO2 balance. You're essentially slowing down without anything.
Okay, so it's pulling. How is called that mechanism?
Metaboloreflex. It's like metabolism, metaboloreflex.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool.
And I think that makes a lot of sense. You know, there's so many people that go like, whatever, breathing. If there's one thing that athletes should practice, it's better breathing mechanics. It's huge. It's really huge.
Yeah, but if you think about it, like 10 years ago, mobility, or 15 years ago, mobility. Oh, who cares about mobility? Just be strong. And then a lot of people realize, oh, wait a minute, I have a peak here where I'm not able to go, even that I train strength constantly because my mobility doesn't allow me. And now I'm too big and too fucked up and I don't have mobility. So I think the breathing is something similar.
And you know what? It's this, like even on a way
I
deeper level.
can hear you. Just
Yeah, no.
closing the door. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I think one nice way of like starting the thing is with respiratory habits, and that we focus on inhaling, that we focus on using the diaphragm, that we become like lower chest breathers and not upper chest breathers, so that we properly use the diaphragm. And
Are there any exercises that we could do before training, or just sitting around when we work or whatever?
This is, I think there's like one thing that I would recommend everybody to do is doing it in a stress-free state. Because if you're experiencing a lot of stress, or that you at least take time to de-stress as you're doing the breathing. But I think it doesn't make sense if you're in a hurry and trying to breathe. I think it messes up the breathing fairly quickly. And there's a couple of things that I really like, and I think they are easy to put into place before you train. But I think before you even implement it, it's really important that you learn how to do it properly. And the easiest way to learning it how to do it properly is lying supine on the floor. Like imagine my back is on the floor now, and I'm lying like this, and I'm in a relaxed position. This allows me to very, very easily figure out what is moving. And it puts my diaphragm in a mechanically sound position if I'm not too hyperextended. I think we talked about that as well last time. A lot of people puts the diaphragm in a bad position if I'm in a constantly overextended position. So the rib cage, the pelvis, they should kind of align like two cups over each. But I recommend for everybody that if you have a hard time breathing into your belly, that you start like this on the ground, that you lie down, put one hand on your belly, put one hand on your chest, and then just by inhalation, trying to make that hand go up and down slowly without moving the hand at the top. And this is just like a basic drill. It's, hey, can you actually breathe through your belly? What very often helps is if you have a yoga block back home, you just put the yoga block on
yoga
your belly.
block? What is a yoga block?
Stuff that people use when they do yoga. Let me check if I have one here. Whatever. I don't have a yoga block, right? At least I don't find it. But these kind of blocks that people have in yoga, they're a little smaller. But the thing is, it's something that has a little weight, so that you get some feedback from the tissue when you're breathing. So what I do when I inhale, I'm feeling that I'm lifting this up. What you should be really aware of is when you force breathing. And what I mean by force breathing, when you're force breathing, it's just, I'll show you from the side, it's just I'm pushing my belly out without breathing. You can make that thing go up and down, but just squeezing the musculature of especially your transversus abdominis. By squeezing the transversus abdominis, you can just push the belly out. This is not what you want to do.
Okay.
And this is a big mistake. A lot of people, they think about engaging the abs. It should be fairly relaxed with the abdominals.
Yeah.
And the descending diaphragm is pushing all the organs down. And because there's not so much space anymore, because of the downward push, there's an expansion of the lower abdomen.
Okay.
So that's what I would recommend first. Is can you actually do this without anything? And then the second thing is, and we talked about it from more like a brain perspective, but the second thing is straw breathing or pursed lip breathing. So straw breathing is super easy. You take a straw, you can do it as we just did, lying on the ground. You can do it seated. I had a couple of guys that I recommended it. Hey, when you're in your office, just take a straw, do 30 inhalations with your straw. One hand here, inhale through the straw, because you have to, because the volume of air that you're able to move and the resistance that you create with the straw, you need to have more diaphragmatic activation.
Okay.
But essentially the goal still is not to breathe like this, but to go like, breathe low, take 30 breaths with the straw. And so, because now we talk about, hey, how can I implement it in my training? I think this is what you should do before you want to implement it into your warm-ups. Like you need to be able to do decently well. And believe me, I just recently worked with a female athlete, and it took her about 2 to 3 weeks of almost daily practice until she was able to do proper belly breathing or abdominal breathing. She was doing a lot of gymnastics. You'll see that also a lot in dancing. A lot of these dancers, they constantly pull their belly in.
Yeah, I think this has some aesthetic thing, right? Like they need to look thin.
Yes, and it's super bad because you're restricting diaphragmatic motion. So that's really bad. You teach yourself how to breathe wrong all the time. And it took her like 2 to 3 weeks of daily practice to actually get rid of that chest breathing and abdominal and work more on abdominal breathing. And I put it in a lot of her warm-ups, and I put it in a lot of like, hey, do it in the morning, do it in the evening before you wake up. But if you're fairly good at that, and if you can control it, I think pursed lip breathing while walking is a great way of doing that. So what you can do is when you walk to the gym, and let's say you're not using public transport, you do pursed lip breathing. So I'm going to do like an inhale. I'm just showing it to you right now how I would normally do. So I'm inhaling like this. Then I'm slowly exhaling 4 to 8 steps, and then I'm inhaling again.
One second, I'm just gonna close it. Yeah, so the ultra breathe device, it's similar to the straw, right? It's just making it difficult to it's having a resistance, so then you need to work harder with the diaphragm.
I got this one. I think it's something pretty similar. I would put it fairly low resistance if you do stuff like that, because what you're supposed to do is, if you really want to increase diaphragmatic breathing activity, is that you do it around 4 or 5 minutes. And you can also do it if you warm up on the bike. I think bike is better than rower. With row, you have so much upper body motion as well. But if you do it on the air bike or on the C2 bike, I think it's great to do the same thing. Inhale 2 pedal strokes, exhale 4 pedal strokes, 8 pedal strokes, and really focus on that diaphragmatic activity. That's a very, very easy way of working on your respiratory habits. And what I also recommend is, because a lot of people ask me, hey, how should I breathe when I squat? It's like the main stabilization, if you're not doing super heavy squats, should be reflexive. I think we talked about that as well. Like most of the stabilization, if you lift something heavy, it's actually not very natural that you need to think about which muscles to brace. What should happen is that there's a normal tendency for your body to engage the musculature so that there's no movement occurring when you want to lift something. And that's what normally happens. So what you can also do is, like our basic exploration position was lying on the ground. I think the next step would be seated. The third step would be standing. And then the fourth step would be walking or doing some kind of exercise. So you can do the same drill. Let's imagine I'm down there in a squat position. I can do the same thing. I can go like, you probably don't see how my belly moves now. Let me touch here. There I go. And you see, there's still a lot of diaphragmatic breathing when the belly expands and goes back in again. So we can practice that in specific positions as well. So you could go, hey, I do a squat, I do a deep inhale, I do 2 squats, and I exhale. I stay down there, I inhale again, and try to focus on that diaphragmatic breathing throughout the full movement. And I think that's also super important, because your ability to do this might change depending on the position that you're in. So sometimes you're really good at doing it lying on the floor, but walking is really hard. For a lot of people, doing proper diaphragmatic breathing in a relaxed way when they're walking, if they have detrained them from doing it well for the last 20 years, it's actually fairly difficult. And now imagine you're doing squats or lunges or any other stuff where there's like more motor demand and even probably a little bit more conscious demand for your brain to do that stuff. It gets even harder and harder. But I think start lying, seated, standing, and then start doing it in more specific positions. I think squatting is
just something to clarify. This breathing pattern we can do it when we do simple exercises, so lunges and air squats with no weight. Once you add weight and you go to 3 reps, 4 reps, 5 heavy reps, are we supposed to breathe in the same way? Because I find really difficult to breathe in and out when I'm squatting. If I'm squatting 100 kilos or whatever, then I'm trying to tighten everything. So I'm kind of breathing as much as I can, holding, go down. And then if I try to breathe out while I'm, getting out of the hole, I feel like I'm just like my back is just bending, so I think you are supposed to hold it and then you breathe out at the end.
I'm not sure, because I did a little workshop at the gym, or we had with dedicated strength sessions where I oftentimes explained that. There's something called the Volcano Maneuver. It's I think that's what you're referring to, is that you inhale. The idea is still pretty much the same. Is I'm engaging my abdominal muscles, and then I'm trying to push air down into my abdomen by descending the diaphragm descent and getting a lot of air down here. I think what a lot of people, when they breathe, still do wrong is they are not making it the diaphragmatic. They engage everything and then they go like.
Yeah, that's the typical thing that everybody does.
You're not creating any kind of additional pressure or intra-abdominal pressure by inhaling with your upper chest muscles. So if I'm using my sternocleidomastoideus and all these scalenes and all these muscles that pull my shoulders up, I'm not creating any more intra-abdominal pressure. That's what you want to do to create more stability when you lift the heavy loads. And this is what you essentially do. If you don't think about anything, and I tell you, hey, I want you to move or lift this heavy thing, what most people will do reflexively is what you should do when you lift. Is you're going to okay, you're going to do some weird motions and you go like, and then you're trying to exhale against your glottis, trying to create that pressure and trying to lift. And this is what you should be doing when you have very, very high loads, is creating that intra-abdominal pressure. But the idea still is the same. If you can't do proper diaphragmatic breathing, you will have a very hard time using your diaphragm and the descending diaphragm to create more pressure in the abdomen. So the goal of that, the maneuver is not too much to get air in somewhere. The goal is to have the diaphragm getting air more down here. Everything down here, you squeeze the muscle from the outside. The diaphragm is pushing down from the top. So you're creating a lot of pressure in here, and that pressure is stabilizing the spine. And then, of course, in the bottom of the squat, where the muscles need to work very hard, and you want to have the most stiffness, because you also have that torso inclination, and there's more room for the spine to bend. You probably want to keep that as you're driving out of the hole and you're coming to a more neutral position. That's what most people do as well. You can start exhaling.
Yeah. How about if you do holding a few seconds in the bottom? Should you also hold the breath in while you're holding for a couple of seconds?
It doesn't work, depending on the pause that you're doing in the bottom. And this goes back to, can I do this? Squeeze my abs and still try to create diaphragmatic breathing. I think a lot of that stuff is hard to see on camera, but I'm still, even if I have my abs squeezed, still try to do this and not go. And I think what you should be focusing on, it's very hard if you have a complete exhalation, it's very hard to keep the tension. So what I normally
exactly.
tell people is, you inhale, you squat down, you exhale a little, but you never fully exhale. If you do the full exhalation, this goes a little bit more back to what you're normally doing in regards to like muscle and brain activity. But what a lot of things and styles will teach you, and it's kind of natural, is that you go into extension when you exhale, and that you go into flexion when you inhale. And that's kind of like natural. If I extend, I get a little bit better expansion of the rib cage. If I flex and I use my abs, I get in more compression of the rib cage. So if I exhale fully, I'm going to use musculature that's going to bring me a little bit more into a flex position. So when I do a full exhale, it's very hard to maintain the rigidity of the trunk and not being pulled towards flexion. But you want to keep a little air. You always have a little air in your lungs. You don't want to have a full exhale. Keep a little air in your lungs when you breathe at the bottom. But still, I think the hardest thing is maintaining tension in the trunk. A lot of people, when they start breathing, they lose tension in the trunk. And I think what's really cool is that you start not doing it with squats, because with squats it's already fairly hard because there's so much movement in different joints. Start in a plank position. So start in a plank and see if you can really contract and still do that diaphragmatic breathing action. And then try to breathe in that position while you focus on contracting, keeping the contraction really hard and tight.
Yeah, I think those are good exercises, because most of the people, we tend to, to bring our belly in for some reason. I don't know if it's, I don't know why, but it seems like you have the lungs here, so then you are using the belly to push something. I don't know, but I think it's something that we have learned wrongly. And having to breathe with our belly is something that we are not used, and it's good that we practice. So when we go on a workout, we use our diaphragm a little bit more. So I think that's perfect. The first part of this breathing. What I think is the third part. We did an intro. So this is the breathing habits that we were talking: mouth against nose. Then the next episode that we will do is going to be a little bit of chemistry, biochemistry between oxygen and CO2, right?